Thanks very much, first of all, to the organizers of Talk Journalism 2018 for inviting me, and especially to Avinash. I think it's been absolutely wonderful, the kind of audience and the enthusiasm and the speakers that I've seen. I've really learned so much. The topic that I'm going to talk about is called, "Is being independent the best way of doing journalism?" You believe what you see, but unfortunately what you see is written by those who see what they believe. Objectivity has become some sort of a metallic object that must be left behind before the writer passes through the op-ed threshold. The biases have stopped beeping. Subjectivity and selectivity bring us eyeballs. Objectivity and impartiality bring us calm and rational thinking. Question is, does the Indian media really want calm and rational thinking? In my experience, the answer is a loud no. Now I ask you, the theme being, is being independent the best way of doing journalism? Who can have a problem with this? The problem rather is, how do we achieve it? We can, if we follow this maxim, that there ought to be more journalism in science and more science in journalism. What do I mean by this? Bringing in more journalism in science would, I believe, bolster the so-called scientific temper, something that incidentally is enshrined in our constitution, by the way. And this is already happening, albeit slower than one would hope for. There are some excellent journalists in old and the new media alike who are writing more and more on science. This is all the more important as our coming decades would be governed by scientific discoveries and inventions that we haven't given our people enough time or words to understand, like GMO or CRISPR, gene editing or river linking, and so many other issues. But for the purposes of today's talk, I wish to concentrate on the second aspect of the maxim, which is that there ought to be more science in journalism. By asking for more science in journalism, I mean injecting in the latter the principles on which science was founded and is run. Ruthless objectivity, a thorough study and citation of prior instances, discoveries and inventions, basing one's opinion on data, inclusion of what are called controls to cancel out the noise and the false positives, a logical, rational aptitude and temper, declaration of conflict of interest and funding, and finally, humility. Now, there are two things that most, if not all, journalists and editors, especially of the young avant-garde variety, exhort, which is one, journalism should be independent, and two, there is no such thing as true objectivity. And we've heard previous speakers mention that. Thing is, most of those who say this are happily dependent and joyously subjective. They are, in effect, frauds. Independent media doesn't just mean independence from being a party mouthpiece or running on corporate ads. Independent media, to me, means being independent of any ideology. Right now, we don't have a single media house, print or digital, that is truly independent. A media house may have shunned party affiliations or ad revenue models, but have they shunned their respective ideologies, left or right? Absolutely not. So in what sense are they independent? Being a prisoner to an ideology while being independent is as damaging, if not more, as being a prisoner to corporate or party funding. But this doesn't enter the discourse, and neither is this ever frowned upon or corrected, because most journalists happily accept that they are ideologues themselves. They don't mind peddling a narrative based on their preferred ideology. In fact, they love it. In a recent debate, the Ramnath Goenka award-winning journalist J. Gopikrishnan claimed that the reason for the left-wing Hindu and Modi-hating bias of the media was because 60 to 70% of journalists were or had been members of SFI or AISA or other communist organizations. Now, he didn't prove it with numbers, so I can't be certain how true his assertion is. There is, however, no escaping the fact that most, if not all, journalists are from the humanities background. And given the kind of books and the kind of authors who've written them and the kind of teachers who teach them, these books that we have thrust upon our humanities students since independence, I am inclined to believe Gopi's claim may have some merit. So the question to be answered is the following: how can one be independent of an ideology? To my mind, one certainly can, but to achieve this, one has to understand this thing called the grey and the black and white. I'm not a fan of the grey. I prefer the black and white. It is not that I absolutely hate the grey. No one should absolutely hate anything unless it is a vegetable belonging to the Ghia family. I detest the grey because I find that this grey and venturing into it and believing in it has given mankind only and only misery. It is because of the grey that there are people who still believe in religious books or in Mao and Stalin and Tipu and Churchill and Rhodes and Aurangzeb and Sir Syed and Allama Iqbal and King Leopold and Guevara and hundreds if not thousands of other men and women who have done or said terrible things, committed awful crimes, but the believers of the grey have forgiven them because in their eyes these men and women have also done some good. Mao was responsible for the murder of 63 million of his own men and women. He smiles from the Chinese currency notes. Churchill murdered 4 million Indians through a contrived famine, besides pioneering chemical warfare and establishing social Darwinism as a standard social model. He was voted as the greatest Briton in a nationwide BBC poll. Grey has birthed cruel empires, and believers of the grey have fettered them, forgetting conveniently that a benevolent dictator is still a dictator, a kind criminal is still a criminal. A religious book that preaches hate in addition to kindness is still a hateful religious book. A believer in grey is the purveyor of hypocrisy. It comes naturally to him because it stems from the fundamental principle of the grey, that your truthful or brighter half be remembered and your lying and darker half be forgotten. In one sense, you are static if you believe in the grey, because your intent always is to show your brighter side, and so you stop revolving. You don't beget seasons. You are always and proudly so the same, fixed like Mercury by the dark pole. Hypocrisy and selectivity are bedfellows. If you point out selectivity in the media or a running narrative or a news report by asking a question that cites prior precedents or by outing the hypocrisy of the reporter, you have no option but to use the phrase, "What about?" Again, in thought if not words. Let us begin then with the example of Dr. Ambedkar. Commenting on selectivity in pointing out the social evils and regressive traits of just the Hindu society, he said, "The social evils which characterize the Hindu society have been well known. The publication of Mother India by Miss Mayo gave these evils the widest publicity. But while Mother India served the purpose of exposing the evils and calling their authors at the bar of the world to answer for their sins, it created the unfortunate impression throughout the world that while the Hindus were groveling in the mud of these social evils and were conservative, the Muslims in India were free from them as compared to the Hindus, were a progressive people. That such an impression should prevail is surprising to those who know the Muslim society in India at close quarters." Ambedkar then proceeded to talk in scathing terms of child marriage, intolerance, fanatical adherence to faith, the position of women, polygamy, and other such practices prevalent among believers of Islam. Now, Ambedkar detested the evil orthodoxy of the Hindu society, exposed the casteist and bigoted nature of many ancient Hindu texts, spoke authoritatively on Hinduism, brought to light its numerous ills, left its folds to become a Buddhist, and yet here was the same man warning us of being selective against Hinduism and Hindu society. Such was his unshakable belief to do the right thing. In today's discourse, especially one managed by intellectuals of limited luminosity and bountiful bias, Ambedkar would have been accused immediately of indulging in whataboutery. Look, they would have cried. Ambedkar is hurt by the wire and scroll long reads that expound in great detail the many social evils in Hindu society. And so he has resorted to asking, what about the social evils of Muslim society? Shameless bhakt, dog whistling Islamophobe. Unfollow him. Downvote his books on Amazon. What Ambedkar was merely doing was pointing out the selectivity and hypocrisy of those who go to town selectively highlighting only the evils that stem from Hinduism. Selectivity is a device that allows the biased to slap labels and define the narrative at will. The church attacks fable, the growing intolerance storyline, the Lynchistan tag, judiciary under threat, Dalits under attack, emergency is here. These are all instances where selectivity was employed knowingly. There are hundreds, if not thousands, of more examples of media selectivity. To miss this facet of our daily political drudgery is to give the impression that things are happening for the first time, that the phrase déjà vu is a Martian gobbledygook and not something invented by earthlings. Outraging on any new occurrence with incomplete information is like fencing the adversary blindfolded. Your every jab is in anger and desperation. The resolution of any problem is inextricably linked with its identification first as endemic or spontaneous. Rest is clickbait. India is intolerant towards gays, towards Dalits, towards minorities and majorities that become regional minorities, towards just and conscientious laws, towards free speech, towards freedom of expression. India has always been intolerant because we have laws and constitutional amendments that protect intolerance. The problem is endemic. It is not going to go away when the BJP goes away. But to realize this, one has to forsake belief in one's preferred ideology, preferred historians, preferred newspaper, preferred news channel. One has to forsake belief in selectivity. Under Prime Minister Manmohan Singh, during his second term in office, there occurred 172,837 crimes against Dalits. 5 Dalit women were raped every single day in 2013. 2,073 rapes against Dalits were reported in 2013, just 1 year, a 31% jump. And the charge sheet rate was upwards of 70%. Under Prime Minister Modi, just this past year, there have been upwards of 100 attacks by Muslim mobs on Hindus, both Dalits and non-Dalits. These attacks include lynchings, attempted lynchings, arson. But how many of these attacks have been highlighted? How many candlelit marches? How many? This is not whataboutery. This is not talking about Babur or Aurangzeb. This is talking about what has happened in the last 5 to 10 years. This is not whataboutery for the sake of it. This is exposing the media's hypocrisy and the fake narrative of those who call themselves independent but are nothing of the kind. And if you talk of freedom of the press and freedom of expression, the narrative being peddled right now is a ridiculous joke. 75 blatant violations by the Congress party of freedom of expression since Rahul Gandhi joined politics in 2004. We aren't talking about Nehru or Indira or Rajiv Gandhi. We're talking about contemporary times, when the media was silent, when there was no emergency, there was no Lynchistan, and not crying of emergency during the UPA years. Our journalists are skating on thin ice. Sooner or later, the grey will vanish, and the sun will appear, and the ice will melt, and the choreography will go for a toss, and the music will be out of key, and you will be left waltzing to a song that only you like, with steps that only you know, and a performance that only you applaud. Save Indian journalism from this future. Bring scientific practice into it. Make it truly independent. Thank you very much.
So, very good evening. And it's a scary thought to be the last speaker. And I just hope it's worth your while. Because I've picked a subject called balanced journalism in today's times. It's the most anodyne, the most boring, the most stupid subject to pick up. I mean, why would you not be balanced? And what's there to debate about being balanced in today's times? In any other times, but in today's times. But if we could change slides, please. Could you go to the next slide, please? I mean, balance, like the yin and yang, is something we all aspire to do. We're told about everything, whether it's the work-life balance, whether it's about your own minds, it's about how you feel about people, your own emotional balance, your EQ. Everything must be in balance, you know. You're a cricketer, you must have the right kind of shots, you must have your Virat shots, you must play a bit like Pujara. Everything should be balanced, perfect, fair. It should all be 50-50 and fairly and squarely placed in a balanced way. Clearly, this is a good thing. But of course, as we look out to journalism and the challenges there are, what balanced journalism or the whole idea about being balanced in journalism conceals is a great deal more worrying and actually needs to be clearly thought through. There is a WhatsApp message which is sort of I found that among the most interesting WhatsApp messages that was doing the rounds, journalism 101 it goes, if someone says it's raining and another person says it's not, do you sort of take a mic and go to one person and say it's raining? She says it's not. No, damn it, you're a journalist. You look out of the window and you try and report if it's rained at all. That's what you do. So do you just give two sides and leave it? You don't. So I think the question that I'll be hoping to discuss and share some thoughts with you in the next 5 or 6 minutes is about how balanced journalism actually takes away from a lot of our core job as what we're supposed to be doing as journalists. There is the fundamental question, which has been put very beautifully in kind of all kinds of poetry, etc., कि आप नाप रहे हैं या चीज़ों को तोल रहे हैं? What kind of things are you putting on two sides and trying to balance? And for me, I mean, I just ran into this, between the lies and the truth. Are we going to use the same metric for them? Are we going to say, here's a lie and here's a truth, you decide? So I think between balance and false equivalence that a lot of journalism tries to do and masquerades as, this is independent, this is perfect balanced journalism, we have to fundamentally ask ourselves that question, that as journalists, what are we to do? Are we to just kind of convey a truth and a lie, put it on the same platform and say you decide? Or are we to do more jobs, our job, take a call and cite out and continue our quest for the truth? So I think that's like a key question. The Washington Post, I think a week ago, actually called out President Trump and said that in the past 558 days, he had actually given out 4,229 mistruths and had actually peddled that. And here's a serious mainstream paper that goes out and calls out the president. This was kind of not seeking balance, but seeking some kind of truth, some kind of resolution to the various mistruths and fake stuff that seems to be doing the rounds. What actually is interesting in the whole global media debate, balance has like reams of theory. You'll read lots about what balance is about, but two things are particularly striking and have a great relevance to our times. One is, of course, a very striking comment by Steve Bannon, this right-wing media strategist who was Trump's chief political strategist. He's no longer there. He's trying to set up something in Europe to put all the right-wing parties together and get them cracking. He said something very interesting in an interview in February earlier this year, and he said, just flood the zone with shit, with shit. Just flood it, because the enemy, the rival, the opponent is not the Democratic Party, it's the media. We need to just push so much slush that they can't be heard. Nobody can be heard. So, we'll come back to this point again. The second thing is what the debate that has been taking place in the UK, and particularly with the reporting of science journalism. The BBC put in place a lot of studies in 2010, 2011, and then in 2012, when they looked at what was happening to science reporting. And what was happening was as follows. You reported science, and you reported a complete kind of a mumbo-jumbo, hocus-pocus on the left. So you said the earth is round, but some people believe the earth is not round, and you conducted a debate. So what you end up doing, which is what their inquiry reports led by scientists of the BBC found in 2012, you actually ended up giving the air of legitimacy and the oxygen of publicity to the fakus. So for people who completely weren't scientists, but were able to enter the science debate, and in the quest of this false balance, were able to validate their point of view, which had no scientific basis. A very specific story that happened in the UK, which broke out, was a story on, which was a scientific survey, quote unquote, which claimed that the MMR vaccine was causing kids to develop autism. So the journalist, like a lot of you here was very smart, and he figured that the science journalists would give him a tough time over this. So he went to people who were, party journalists, sort of regular people who didn't understand science, and through them, he sold it as a lifestyle story. So you had lots of children who probably lost out on the benefits of the MMR vaccine because they very sweetly reported the story as, here's the MMR vaccine scientists, and here's the other side, which says, it causes autism. And it was after that there was a lot of concern in how science reporting was happening. And in this, there's an Indian, but it's the Indian origin author, scientist, etc., called Simon Singh. He said it very brilliantly, and he put it very well. And he said, I'm not going to do these interviews with the BBC when you ask me about miracle cures or mumbo jumbo, because you will just end up coming to me and saying, you know, these mumbo jumbo guys have cured everybody by the touch of a left hand or by some Baba equivalent there. And you get me to validate that by saying, okay, and here's Simon Singh, who says this is not okay. So okay, not okay, and I pass both of them. And as a result, the mumbo jumbo person completely gets lifted. So just connecting back to what Steve Bannon said about flood the zone with shit, pardon me, S-H-I-T. So flood the zone so much with so much of nonsense that if you're following some kind of anodyne mantra of balancing, you end up balancing two things which should never be on the same tarazu, which should never be on the same weighing balance. You balance sludge with important data. So frankly, as journalists, our job, can we go to the next slide, please? So our job, frankly, is to actually stick our necks out. And it's a tough call, and we may say, let the science reporters do that. But increasingly, we find in jobs of people who report on politics, who report on society, it's important for the journalist to take a call and to research, to work harder, and figure the truth and stand by it. This is not to say that you snuff out diverse opinions, but how you push 100 opinions into a room of opinions where you don't do fake balancing, I think, is critical to the times in how this whole era, the times we're living in, will be documented. There is something we see very often on television channels, but I'm not a TV beta. A lot of us in print end up doing the same thing, that you posit fact versus opinion. So somebody's been lynched, somebody's died, I'll put the facts out, and then I'll go to somebody who'll air an opinion that, but do you think they were right to not worship animals as much as we do? And I say, okay, mera kaam ho gaya. I've done my 2.5 minutes of my package is done. So there is a fact, and you balance that with an opinion. There's that mistake we make. The other very popular trope that is used in television and in print is, maybe change the slide, please, is a pro versus the anti. So you unthinkingly, or all of us unthinkingly, put a set of opinions in a basket titled pro, and we put another titled anti, almost making it perfectly okay, normative, fine, to choose between the two. I'm with those, some who kill, some who don't, and it's all the same. But actually, it's a very tough normative call. It's a very tough call of conscience, call of fact, and a call of our duty to our fundamental calling as journalists whose business it is to do literature in a hurry, whose business is to record what we're hearing, seeing, and is to put a filter or what we think is right and not just sort of mindlessly balance it. Because in the whole process of balancing, we're failing our jobs as journalists. So the temptation is, it's a crowded road out there. There are road signs pointing all over. There is a very robust social media which does its stuff. There is Twitter, there is Facebook, and there are all kinds of things. Younger people know of more things which are happening. Why am I, as media or the mediator, required at all? It's for journalism to have any kind of life the morning after or to survive. You need to be that filter. All of us need to be that filter and cut through the balance, cut through a false equivalence, and take a call and say it. And next time you look at anything and you think that, no, I must just balance this, Who's saying this and who's saying that? Put them both on the same page. But we need to do more than just draw a pencil line. We need to think clearly and figure what we think is true, get to the facts. It's always tougher. There'll be people, there'll be probably half the room that says, you're talking rubbish or so-and-so is biased. But we need to take that call and call out the facts and keep that as central to our vocation. Otherwise, we'll just slip down that and there'll only be rant, opinion, and bigotry left if we don't sort of look at a fine balance and not get faked by the false balance. Thank you.